There we go.
Perfect. So I guess I'll start as we planned. We wanted to discuss where we can park our Bitcoin so it will yield additional income. And currently we are limited to Ethereum only. And after doing a fresh research, I came to a definitive conclusion that Badger is the best option there is, and nobody comes even close. You can farm on Sushi, for example, a Bitcoin pair. You can farm on Uniswap. You can farm on a new project that's called Notional Finance. I linked it in the Treasury chat before, but it's yielding only 9% now. And Sushi and Uniswap is yielding even less. And they are expensive and have impermanent loss and all that stuff. So nobody on Ethereum comes even close to Badger in regards to Bitcoin yields, and it's just so happens that they are friend of ours. So as we discussed on a previous call, by parking our Bitcoin on Badger, we are also helping our ecosystem, our friends, our Graker partner. So it's a what do you call it? Positive feedback loop, I think, right?
Yeah.
So I think that should be a pretty easy case to present to the dark node operators why Badger is the best. Currently, at the moment, ibTC Vault, let me get a fresh number, it yields 33% APR without boost and up to 100%, actually 185% if we are fully boosted. It means that we've got either a Badger or a Digg at the same amount as we are farming Bitcoin. So there's that. Um, I have posted in the Treasury discussion a couple of screenshots from the Badger chat where they uh, described how much it costs to deposit or mint ibBTC. For our numbers, it shouldn't be a serious consideration. Of course, it bites. It all around. It should be around $600 more or less. Depends on the gas prices. And I just posted their most recent announcement that they've got incentives, uh, as they say, with consideration for high gas fees. 10 Badger will be given to addresses that mint ibBTC and deposit into LP Vault, and 5 to current users with non-native balance. But that's not us. So even now they've got a little bit of incentives. 10 Badger is about $200 more or less, right?
That 10 Badger incentive is if you actually mint your own ibBTC, which is kind of a very gas intensive process. We would probably just deposit our funds in the more traditional way. In which
Yeah,
case, I think we might get
you
5 Badger.
you mean first deposit on Curve, right?
Yeah, we would deposit on Curve and then deposit on Badger. And if I'm not mistaken, since we had no assets prior, that would get us 5 Badger
It,
for the incentive rather than
yeah,
10.
I wasn't able to get definitive numbers. I don't have any Bitcoin at the moment myself, so I wasn't able to test it myself. But from other users, I wasn't able to get definitive numbers. How much it costs for a one-click deposit that Badger just activated, and how much it will cost to separately mint each on our own. But if we mint ibBTC on our own, we will also get a small premium, and it was, I think, about 0.1%, I think. So yeah, minting ourselves might even be profitable. But we need to double check the numbers.
So,
But in the
Arvi,
yeah,
quick clarifying question. Does utilizing this strategy then mean that we are putting half the treasury in Badger itself?
that's up to discussion. That's up to
Or
dark nodes
Dig.
to decide, or Dig, yeah. For, so we've got a couple of options. One is unboosted. We can park all our Bitcoin that we want to get yield from and get 33% now, but it will be a little bit less later on, definitely. And just be unboosted, and as we farm Badger, we will get a bigger boost over time. Or we can, for the half of Bitcoin that we want to deposit, we buy Badger, and then we get fully boosted. But we can also not have that Badger lying without any yield. We can get another part of the Bitcoin that amounts to the Badger amount and deposit it on Sushiswap, so it will be working as well. And currently, wrapped Bitcoin (WBTC) Badger is yielding additional 41%. So if we decide to buy Badger, the Badger will be also yielding us additional Badger. So kind of loop once again, positive loop, I think. So
Posted.
this, huh?
Sorry, I posted a bunch of text. I think I don't know how long ago, like a day ago, about some of that. It's either, yeah, it's either 100% in at the 33%, but the money checks out that we would be making more if we split it in half to have those
Yeah.
native assets, the Badger or the Digg, as long as the percentage that is higher in the yield is more than twice as much the lower percentage. So at 30-ish%, it would pay for us to split it in half to do that, as long as the yield percentage was more than 60 for the higher percentage. And at this point, it's 100. So we would make a lot more using half of the money at that higher rate and the other half just holding the native asset, making nothing. But to RV's point, we could also put that other half to work to some degree. But if we did do the sushi, we would have to split it into thirds. So then we would have a third at the higher rate, and then the other 2/3 would make up the sushi, and the other and the other part, so that we could still have the 100% ratio.
Yeah. So if this group is fine with Badger, then we should do some quick number crunching and figure out the most optimal way to deploy our funds and be done with it.
Yeah, well, there's also the scenario to be discussed, and trying to be the conservative voice in this group, I'd be remiss if I didn't. What happens if the bear market, the ugly bear market, strikes, right? What would we expect would happen to the Badger price with respect to our entry in comparison to the Bitcoin price with respect to our entry, and the impact then on the Treasury? Generally, as we've all observed, when the bear market comes, everything reverts back to Bitcoin. So it's typically a good place to be. Badger, we don't know. We haven't had a post DeFi serious bear market, but in our modeling here for this, we should most likely consider a likely outcome if something were to happen to the Badger price while we were in this position.
But also, I think that's a great point, by the way. But also, our position in a bear is quite different from many other protocols in a bear. If I were Ren Labs, I'd probably have a different position, because I would know I have huge salaries to cover, and I might have to cover them for multiple years of a bear market. But that's not really our situation. So I think, yes, I think the point is a valid one. We should definitely think about, what are the downsides and what does it mean for us, but also keep in mind that we don't have salaries to cover. We don't have fixed costs or even really any variable cost at all right now. The only cost I see are simply funding some of the projects we'd like to fund, and if that's delayed in a bear market, that's obviously something we'd prefer not to do, but it's not a critical situation where we have to turn off the lights. Also, we will be continually earning Bitcoin, even in a bear market, obviously less, but we are earning regularly Bitcoin. How much less remains to be seen if we go into a bear market. And final point, I do think, although no one knows, that if we do go into a bear market now, it's going to be very different than what we saw 2017, 18, where you didn't really have all these stable coins out there to park your money. So people did move into Bitcoin. I'm not so sure that's going to be the case this time. But again, I have no idea. No one really knows until the scenario plays out. But also, the final thing I'll say is that, if we do want to be conservative, I think well, that would be more to keep stables or some percent in stables, which I think is very prudent for most treasuries. But again, in our situation, I'm not so sure that's the case, simply because we don't have really these costs we have to absolutely cover over multiple years. Something that, as I said, is probably very different from for Ren Labs.
Yeah, and as Max brought up when I raised the point of stables previously, with the advent of host to host and what's to be built on top of that, the Treasury should naturally begin accumulating stable coins. I do think that when we have fixed costs, we should probably maintain some level of stable coins as to fully offset those fixed costs for a period of time that we agree upon, call it 6 months, a year, whatever it might be. But for now, I think in the spirit of, we've got this treasury with no real responsibility yet to spend it, we probably can be a little bit less conservative with what we're doing here. So I suppose I see no big issue to give it a whirl.
I think it's worth asking, does anyone have any yield place to park these funds besides Badger to bring up? We're needling toward Badger, but I think, just in case.
I don't really. I think it's a great idea. Thought it was great from the beginning. Just one point I would add is that it seems like let's assume we do some sort of Badger purchase for Boost, which sounds like what we probably want to do. I guess we are backing into an asset allocation strategy, kind of almost like the tail wagging the dog, because we want to actually keep most of it in Bitcoin, and that's kind of the best way to do it. I have no issue with that. It's probably the easiest thing to do. But we're just starting this kind of slippery slope into an asset allocation strategy here, without, let's say, a higher level strategy. But again, I think that was kind of what we expected in the beginning. So just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, in the spirit of that, I would recommend that when we write this up, we very clearly stipulate that this is a temporary measure, and not to be reflective of the asset allocation strategy when we've got a fully baked proposal for how the whole treasury management is to be structured.
And
And
I
just
definitely agree with that. Sorry, go ahead.
piggybacking off what DeFi. Oh, sorry. Just want to wrap it up. Piggybacking off what DeFi Whiskey said, I spent an inordinate amount in. I posted a couple days ago some of the a link to A16Z's DAOs, like everything about DAOs and everything. And I do think that from what I recall, and I'm fully on board, we want to show darknet operators a quick win. So I'm absolutely on board on allocating it to our partners and really just getting that done. But I do think
much.
as my alarms are going off as this has all the looks of, okay, we're getting into the weeds of doing things without proper structure, without the priorities. And I know we're all on board on this, but just I definitely am on DeFi Whiskey's camp of sooner rather than later, let's start, drafting the priority document and like what happens. And I think I threw this a couple of days ago on the chat. What happens if, how are we going to move this around? What about if one of us falls deathly ill or something? How do we remove that member? Little details that, we don't want to, find out about that process once we don't have a process. We want to do it. But I'm fully on board on the nature of, let's do it as a quick win. But my alarms do go off that, okay, we definitely want to parallel to this, possibly start working on creating the structure of the working group. But I'm excited overall.
So sounds like everybody is in agreement with Badger idea.
I think we're basically in. RV, one other question did occur to me, and I'm not sure the exact terminology or how to ask it, but so if we split our position, right, with BTC and Badger in order to maximize the boost, to what extent does that boost compensate for the lack of appreciation we would have had in the Bitcoin side in USD, which I think has a 10-year average of about 230% per annum? How, in other words, how is that APY really being calculated and displayed to us? And do we lose something by not actually holding all of it in BTC?
That's actually a really good question, and the one that I pondered myself, and I'm not sure if it's even possible to give a definitive answer to that, because it implies either having some kind of trading strategy for Badger, or having some kind of investment thesis on Badger and doing some kind of forecasting on its price.
To make sure I understand the question, are you asking we may be missing out on that portion's gain because BTC historically is the mover here in gain? Is that what you're asking?
Well, so we know that Bitcoin has an average, and this is a moving target, but last time I looked at it, an average annual appreciation of about 230% measured in dollars, right? So we know that long term, that's what a pure Bitcoin unlevered position, may revert to. With respect to Badger, we don't know what that asset is going to appreciate at. As I look at the all-time chart, which is almost a year old now, looked like there was an immediate massive spike followed by a half a year bleed out, and then some choppy activity thereafter. But certainly, hasn't seen the appreciation that you would expect from Bitcoin. Now, given that the Badger token is being emitted as a mechanism to incentivize use of the platform, there's that sort of element of, we could call it quantitative easing going on.
The whole freaking world, and it's.
Sorry, was somebody chiming in?
Gone.
You can speak again.
Okay, yeah. So well, I mean, it just, to sum it all up, I'm not really sure that Badger itself, as a position, as a major position, is as good as Bitcoin, to be deserving of half of our treasury. I mean, we can certainly do the experiment and see how it goes, but it may be useful to create some sort of I don't know, some sort of test group or model portfolio of just Bitcoin to compare it to. So it's something to see that this is really the way forward, and measure the result, as opposed to have just having everything kept in Bitcoin from the start.
Yeah, I do think
I
think that's something to consider for sure. I brought up something similar. Max reminded me that luckily we have Bitcoin coming in the door each day, which is one thing to consider. And then I think between the two strategies, we were talking about the best way to allocate it. I think we could get away with 1/3 Badger to maximize the return on this as well, which again could be put into like we were talking about Digg, which would keep us exposed to Bitcoin. So I think that's definitely something to talk about. And I'm not like the asset guy, so I'm not quite sure. I don't know who has the best ideas around that, but yeah, like you said, it's a first stab, So I don't know. We do it with 1/3 Badger, or I don't know, or Digg. RV, did you have a sense of or DeFi on the Badger versus Digg aspect of which we end up being exposed to on that third or half?
Just a quick question though. Would this strategy mean each epoch, when we are allocating money to this strategy, we would be converting, let's say, whatever percent, 1/3 to Badger or 1/3 to Digg or some combination thereof every epoch? Is that what we're saying?
I don't think we've talked about going forward other than one large sum at this time. I don't think we've broached that topic yet, if this was to be some kind of ongoing contribution or not.
My impression is that this is a one-time safe snap that we're all going to organize via an RIP, to get something moving and show the community that we've got a quick little win here. But as for making it something ongoing, I think that's another matter entirely.
Well, that brings up another big issue, right? Because we can just do one off, but then 4 or 5 epochs down the road, we basically have again half of our treasury just sitting there doing nothing, right? I would almost prefer to have a longer term strategy. Doesn't have to, that long term doesn't need to be over a year, but and say this is what we're going to be doing. But if we do that, then you need to kind of do some projections and start to say, which is going to be hard because we're just starting now host to host. So maybe that's what we should do, is kind of have something now. Yeah, that's probably right, because host to host I think is going to change things quite dramatically in ways we just don't yet understand. So it's kind of crazy to do longer term projections past a few months now. Okay, that's fair. So let's just get something out there. Okay.
We also don't know what the APIs will be in 3 months' time. So committing to a
Yeah.
farm more than 3 months ahead is probably very risky. It would be annoying if it turned out that the API is dropped, but we're sort of committed through governance to some strategy that isn't optimal anymore.
I hear you. That's why I think that's why it gets tricky, because almost better is to have the high level that says, look, we're gonna keep 50% in Bitcoin at all times, and we're gonna keep we want whatever 25% or 30% in DeFi, which could include Badger and whatever else the working group says recommends if it's approved. And then that on a month-to-month basis, you have this working group who can be a little bit flexible and can say, okay, we got this. This is our asset mix this month. This is what we need to do with it. I think that's something that could be manageable, but where we're having to really rely on that working group with these high-level guidelines to make these decisions. Because otherwise, there's just so many things that are going to start to come up, right? And then we're going to be kind of stuck with some very simple strategy that is probably, as you said, APIs change. We're going to be back here every 2 months having this long discussion. What now, guys? Instead of having our five or whatever 7 team members who are just out there making things happen for us. So if we move forward with this, let's just get something done. I get it, but without having that bigger picture kind of guiding, that's what I think we need to be doing, quite frankly.
I agree with that. I was hoping we could work toward that ultimately this would be a suggestion on what to do with this relatively small chunk of funds, but that we would be proposing the purpose and the guardrails, and here's what can be done with it to what degree, and here's kind of where we think we ought to be doing that. And if the yield went to 0, this group would have the authority to pull those funds out. And whether that means invest them somewhere totally different, or at least prevent these funds from dying on the vine at a particular yield pool, but that was my hope, was that there would be some I don't know, small group of people that could steward these small amount of funds, and not the whole community fund going forward, and not in perpetuity, but for a short amount of time to yield this into something, and we would check back in, and it would involve reporting and etc. And I think we discussed this a bit in chat, but Safe Snap I don't think would ultimately be appropriate for this particular move, because we're talking like, I don't know, eight transactions just to get it into Badger ultimately. And I think if we proposed a series of 8 votes to the dark node operators, then we might not be the right people for this job.
It shouldn't be 8 votes. It should be one vote that counts all of those moves, probably. But what DeFi Whiskey said, that's a perfect transition towards the working group discussion. We have already spent almost 30 minutes discussing Badger, and that's awesome. But Whiskey said that he has only 1 hour time, and he's the guy who knows about structures. So we should probably transition to discussing how a working group can operate, and all that stuff. DeFi Whiskey, do you want to continue?
Yeah, okay. And also, of course, you guys can stay as long as you want. I just have to leave in about 30 minutes. Yeah, so I guess maybe the first thing is more of a question, because I'm certainly not an expert on structure. So I think my qualification is I'm just someone, I'm probably not the only one on this call who wants to see us move forward, at least in parallel with providing some structure as we do the specifics of yield. For the points I just mentioned, a few minutes ago on the yield, which is I just think to do a proper job, you're going to need, a properly mandated working group. And once you go there, you're already into the situation of having to understand, okay, what does that mean? How many people? What's their mandate? Are we voting on them or not? Or, how often are they reporting? So my hope is that we don't necessarily treat these two initiatives now as separate, but we move forward with the yield, but in parallel, really with the yield itself, we start to say, let's provide structure to this working group for yield and see how it goes. And then based on, let's say, the lessons learned there and what the community will accept and what we propose and whatever, we kind of refine it and get to the point where we have both a yield strategy and a working group, for Treasury yield strategy, in the sense of, how to manage this group. And then from there, we can extrapolate out and say, okay, now what are the other groups we want to take this? So I think maybe the way forward is to do that, instead of having more of a theoretical, this is the way we should structure, REN as far as working groups go. Let's just do it as part of this yield exercise and put some structure there. Because my feeling is, if we go back to the darknet operators, they're going to have these questions anyway, and it's going to ultimately force us to do that, right? So, I don't think it's a discussion about what's the proper working group model in general. I think it's, let's put some structure to this specific group that we've already kind of defined around yield. And when we go to the darknet operator for approval with that specific strategy, let's say it's Badger or whatever, part of that is showing them that we've got some structure on this working group. That's kind of what I would hope would happen. I welcome your thoughts there.
And supporting sort of your vision, if I was case, I think that one of the, from what I've seen in other organizations, not much of an active participant, but I've witnessed it, is that the fires that will come up will take time and they can generate frustration. And right now we're in the excitement part. Oh, we're gonna make it the first moves. We're gonna show a quick win, but really quickly, we can get bogged down in detail. So I do think in rather urgently, we should start developing and thinking, okay, so this can apply to the yield group, and then we need the governance, we need the emergency shutoff group. I mean, there's so many other variables to have to consider, but overall, the excitement is going to wear off rather quickly, because it's going to become very administrative, like with all the procedures and the steps. So we really have to have our north star very clear and shiny on what the priorities are and how we're going to move with specific fires that will come up administratively, obviously.
Yeah, I think that's bang on, seeking. Especially with respect to the fact that ultimately what we're talking about here is creating, an administrative group with lots of homework and detail and minutia. And in the spirit of that, I think that, while all of us here are, volunteering our time and discussing these things, kind of on an ad hoc basis, what's the biggest impact that we could hope to have? And I think that lending some structure to the most impactful group or working group that we could create would probably be that. While I think that there certainly would be value in creating a specific working group with its own structure around the topic of yield, I do think that in the grand scheme of things, the yield discussion is kind of one component of what a proper Treasury working group would be looking at. And to the extent that we can clarify, what the main working group responsibilities and mandate are going to look like, I think that's the bigger lever to pull here.
I've got two questions. How do you guys envision this working group? Should it have some authority, some powers from the get-go, from the start, or it should work some kind of other way?
What do you mean by powers?
I mean, should this working group have a direct control over some amount of the treasury, for example?
I mean, I think it should have control over all of the treasury that's been allocated to it. It sounds like it's our entire treasury for this yield, but within these very specific guidelines that we put in front of the darknet operators for approval, right? And to what level of detail that is, I think that's probably what the working group needs to come back with when they think through this. How often will they need to modify things or make changes, or what happens if the price of Badger triples or goes down 80%? I mean, all these things can probably have serious implications for how we manage our money within this structure, and I think the working group needs to be able to react, but again within the confines of some sort of boundaries laid out by the dark node operators. But within those boundaries, I'm hoping, my belief, maybe I'm in the minority here, is the working group has a maximum flexibility to do whatever they need to do. Again, this is a team composed of RIN community members. My guess is most or not all of them will be dark node operators who are acting in our best interest, and it's going to be a committee that has to work off of whatever 3 of 5 or 4 of 5. So within that or 5 of 7, whatever it is, I would like to see the maximum flexibility.
Okay, so my next question is then, how defined should our guidelines be? Should we write down each possible scenario before it happens, or it doesn't have to be so defined? What do you think?
I would think more overarching principles with some possible specifics to illustrate them. I don't think we can think of every example, and if we did, I think just listing every example wouldn't be as productive as this is the goal and purpose of this working group, of what at least of its mandate and charge for this chunk of the treasury, and the goal in this case would be to maximize the yield. I think we could talk further about maybe some things that would come up, but I think we could illustrate some of that with, for example, were this to happen, maybe we would take this action. But again, illustrative of the purpose that we're asking for the mandate for.
Oh, general guidelines, more or less, correct?
Yeah, I think it was on the last call when I suggested perhaps a step forward. A next step forward would be for us to propose and all agree on, a general set of priorities for what the Treasury working group would be setting out to do. I think functionally, the way you typically see these work in a DAO is when there's a proposal, an RIP in this case, or an item that requires a budget. That budget is voted on by the DAO, and then upon successful approval, allocated to the working group with some mandate as to how to utilize it. But every subsequent transaction from that point, is up to the flexibility of the working group to carry out. I think we probably don't want to be bogged down in the minutia of calculating, every little scenario that could come up. We're going to want to mainly focus on putting the right people who are going to do the right thing, and then having some mechanism to pull them out if they're not. But generally, we protect the Treasury by making sure that only specific budgets are approved and given to the working group for access to those funds. And we can very clearly see through the fact pattern that results from that if they're working in the best interest of the spirit of what that budget was allocated for or not. And of course, we'd have some reporting around that. But really, I think that the step forward here is to clarify, the primary goals. So what might those be? Certainly, one of them would be to maximize the yield of unused assets, and we're handling that. So there's one principle for the working group, the Treasury working group. We could talk about other ones. I might propose, development projects that further the aims of dark node operators. Things that we want to see brought into existence that benefit our ability to operate within the ecosystem. We may want to allocate to quick guides or some kind of marketing efforts. Probably we want to see what Alameda has in mind for that, but that's something that we could, if we had an idea for a video that didn't exist yet, we could get it done. And we can hammer out some other ideas, but I think we ought to be talking about, what are the goals for this working group, and from there, we could flesh that out into more specific mandates.
And another question. So let's say we have a working group, we have general guidelines, and we have a multisig that controls the treasury. This, how will it work in terms of dark nodes voting or not voting for a certain action? Can we bypass having dark nodes to vote and essentially taking 3, 5, 7 days on this, or there will be some kind of actions that we can take, the working group can take on our own, independently, basically. For
I would
example,
assume to DeFi
yeah.
is. Go ahead. I was gonna say. I said as DeFi was saying. I think we'd be laying out the goal and what we plan to do, and the vote would be to allocate the funds to the group to take that action. Again, with strong guidelines, and we're gonna have to talk about those guidelines and keep bringing that up because this, we're not running off and doing whatever we want here. We have a specific mandate. I assume we're gonna request, and it's gonna kind of hew to that, at least for this group. Unless DeFi, you're suggesting we kind of go bigger vision with the longer term, but
No. I think it's
I'll explain what I mean.
well.
For example, we've got a badger farm that yields, for example, now 30%. And they make some changes, and this best yield moves to some different pool in the badger project. So it's only logical for us to move our funds from the previous pool to the new pool. Correct? Correct. It's not new it's not a new farm. It's not a new strategy. It's nothing new. We're just moving funds from one pool to another pool. Will we need a vote for that? I'm just trying to envision how all this works.
I think it depends on how you get this mandate to start, right? That's why we need to be smart about it. I think if you go there and say we're
Yes.
going to put it in this vault and we're going to have 30% whatever Badger or Dig or whatever, then you're constrained. But if you say we're going to put it on Badger, use Badger protocol, we're going to denominate it in BTC. Our target vault is this. But that could change based on yield. But what won't change is that it'll be denominated in BTC, and boosted with this asset up, plus minus this percent. You're specific enough that says, okay, here's our strategy, but you've given yourself some flexibility within that. If that's the way we get the approval, then yeah, you've got your flexibility. So I think we have to be smart about it.
I would agree that our goal is to structure this such that that's how we're getting the authority to do this. I would agree. I don't think we should structure it such that it would require a vote at each and every stage, unless there was a wild changing of strategy.
Yeah, I agree. I think there needs to be some aspect of delegation that goes on in a DAO for it to be successful. We can have the dark nodes all approve major budgets, And then as for the spending of line items within that budget or the moving of funds around to maximize the mandate related to that budget, that really ought to be on the working group to just take care of. That's what we're putting them in place for, presumably, right?
Okay, so basically what we need to think now is guidelines and how multisig can work.
Yeah, I would say, I think we start with the actual strategy itself. That it sounds like you're going to go back now and put some more detail on that RV, if I'm not mistaken, and we can do it kind of all within Discord. Just post it. And once we have that, then I think we can back into, okay, this is then the type of approval we need to ask for, right? To keep it specific enough where, the darknet operators feel comfortable, but also general enough where the working group has the flexibility within those, confines to make some changes. And also with that, we can start to talk about this working group kind of structure, because we can start to think about, okay, here's our strategy. So wait a minute, is it going to be a multi-sig? Okay, we're going to be using Gnosis Safe. Is it going to be a 3 of 5, 5 of 7? And what type of reporting do we want to do with that, et cetera, et cetera. So I think if we can just kind of lock in more or less what our strategy is going to be, from that we can start to build around that, all these other things that we need to do. And then from that, I think we've got a document, we've got an RIP we can put in front of the dark node operators. We have a working group, and we have a high level strategy.
Max, do you know how long we are going to be limited to Ethereum only?
Well, if we did a working group that had multisig, this multisig you could have one for each chain, and then there's no worries about being limited to Ethereum, because the working group can manage setting up a multisig on each chain and
Awesome.
handle all of that.
So multisig equals multi-chain yield, and there are a lot of opportunities for good yields with stablecoins as well, and with our partners like Curve as well. Curve on our Bitroom gives out 20% on stablecoins the last time I've checked. So as I see it, we should focus how we can set up a multisig as soon as possible. Obviously, with guidelines and all that stuff. Yeah, it's 22.71% in Try Crypto pool at the moment, which is pretty
Wait, so
nice.
you're moving away from Badger? I thought we
No,
agreed to do Badger.
no. I'm just giving an example why multisig and multi-chain yielding can be very lucrative, profitable. I'm not sure what is the best word for this. And why I asked the question I asked is because I was thinking, my mind's racing. Wait a second. Um, because I was thinking about how we can define the guidelines. And one of the ways I thought about defining the guidelines is that we can limit ourselves to parking our funds, our treasury, in one of our partners. And we can define our partners obviously as Grey Core members, which is Curve, Saber, um, some other guys, Badger, obviously. Um, and I think we can include Keeper DAO, but their yields are shit at the moment. And I think someone else was there. We can include Convex as well. So that's what I was thinking. We can limit ourselves to a couple of friendly projects.
Is Convex a partner in some respect? They're not Grey Core.
No, they are not. No, they are not. But I'm pretty sure Convex is a product of Curve. No.
They
they're
are
unrelated
supported by
entities.
Curve. Yeah, they're not a product of
Oh,
Curve. They're
okay.
supported by
My bad.
Curve, and
My bad.
yeah,
Okay, so that's up for discussion.
they're close. They're very close. Let's put it that way.
So that's why I asked. I was thinking about how we can set up the general guidelines, and I think the one that makes sense in terms of ecosystem part of our fund and getting the best percentage possible, and as well as allowing the working group to have uh, some room uh, for their activity, we can be like this. Limit ourselves to friendly projects.
Yeah, I fully support the keeping our treasury within the ecosystem guardrail for the working group when we get going on that. Yeah, and it's also protective because Ren only tends to work with pretty good projects from what I've seen. And just by way of assuring that we're going to work within our own ecosystem, we're ruling out a lot of new and dodgy projects from even being considered when we give some autonomy and multi-sig to that group. So I think it's a good idea for a lot of reasons, and also because then we can start to collect governance tokens of these partners, um, thereby furthering our ability to direct emissions to our own assets as we move into the future.
Could I
But I
ask,
think it's
since we'd previously defined yield as the higher important item, and then supporting our partners as a B objective, what if there was a blue chip that offered a higher yield but was not one of our partners? And I'm only asking this for the sake of our mandate on this particular aspect, but that may go against what we had discussed as maximizing it. I don't think it does at this point. I think maximizing and using our partners will be commingling, and the only way to do it. But just for the sake of that, what do you think?
Well,
You know,
since it would
go ahead.
be out of not in the guidelines that I've just mentioned, if we go with something similar, then for any profitable farm outside of our um, friendly projects, our guidelines, then we should put up a vote, and Darknouts will decide the fate. I think that's how it should work.
I wouldn't support it personally, but it is up to the community after all. I think that to the extent to which we can make the Ren Treasury something that you get access to for your platform's liquidity by being a friendly partner of the project, I think that it's entirely in our interest to cultivate that fact pattern.
Oh, I've got a couple of.
Go ahead.
I'm just thinking how we should move further, and the question I've got now is multisig first or park on Badger first and then work on the multisig after?
I think park on Badger first. It's going to take a lot less consideration to move funds into some yield farming than it is going to be to set up a fully fledged working group.
What do you think, Whiskey? You unmuted, I saw.
well, wait a minute. So maybe I don't understand, because if you want to get into Badger, we're going to need a multi Badger anyway, right?
I think we've discussed on a previous call that it was possible via SafeSnap. Max?
Well, but the thing is, if we have to do 6 transactions, I'm not sure you can chain all of them in one vote. So it will be perhaps very annoying to do it through Snapshot if you have to have 6 separate votes where everyone has to come and
I thought you could chain them.
I don't know. You can make you can add a bunch of transactions in the vote and you can execute all of them. But I'm not sure how you would actually do contract interactions that depend on a previous contract interaction. And you have to, let's say we have to swap some into Badger. So then you have to swap into Badger, that's one transaction, then deposit and etc. And that might be tricky to do in SafeSnap. I'm not sure, but I suspect.
I feel like we've moved this whole yield group and con idea of this using these funds within a mandate to do as we need past the SafeSnap idea. If I'm not mistaken, that doesn't seem like an appropriate tool anymore for this.
But SafeSnap can always be like the initial place where funds are allocated, and then the community can vote to send that to like the Treasury working group on a regular basis. I think that would always be a safe way to do it in case, if something happened with the Treasury working group, all the funds wouldn't automatically go to that group and then get locked or whatever, in case the multi-sig breaks. So it's always good to have like a fail-safe.
So it sounds like
That seems smart.
multisig is the priority right now, correct?
Certainly seems to be that way, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great idea. Have it as the primary way to allocate funds out to various SIG working groups with a mandate that's been approved through a RIP. In this case, it'll be for yield, and the community votes to move that money into this working group multi-sig. And they're going to take that money and they're going to put it on the Badger within the confines that we lay out. That seems to me the way to go, because that kind of sets up a structure that we can repeat, right? And have, we're not going to have 20 multi-sig accounts, but I can see, a handful of these out there with funds and mandates and reporting structures and everything else. Basically, what I'm hoping we get to, and we start with the yield farming. So yeah, I would much prefer to do it that way.
Okay. So let's probe some thought on how a multisig can be arranged. The one question that immediately came to my mind is what kind of setup do we want? Do we want only darknet operators? Do we want to some kind of KYC, maybe like insider KYC, limited KYC, or something like that? How do you want to arrange all that stuff?
Well, this is why I said we should probably do it together, where we have the yield strategy and the question you just asked. That there's probably about, I don't even know, 30 things we need to resolve there.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think that should be done in parallel, so that when it's put in front of the darknet operators, we've kind of thought this through and we have like answers to all. But I think it's probably not something we could do on the call, because that would be a long discussion and we'll probably miss some things. But I think it's something we could do on Discord together and start to list these all out and kind of map it all out and work through it there. And then maybe have one more call where we kind of get back and say, okay, this is what we've agreed to. Even just the simple, question of, okay, is it a 3 of 5 multi-sig or 5 of 7? I mean, that could be turned into a long discussion. That's just the basic, right?
My thoughts on the matter, I think, I like the idea of a 3 of 5, and perhaps this initial group, maybe we give them a fairly tight term limit, right? Assuming that we're going to not get it right and perfect the first time around, or have access to the right people or the institutional hiring wherewithal right away. But in the interest of getting things moving, get something going that, on sort of a trial basis. And I did like the idea of having some sort of outside expert, max, and then 3 dark node operators, so that the majority of the group would be DNOs. As for who or how to elect, I mean, we've got to discuss all of that. I do think that there should be some level of compensation for whoever we put in this role, because there's going to be a lot of administration. So there's the who piece, right? And that's one thread. And then there's the priorities, guardrails, the mandate piece, which is another major thread. And then I suppose the third thread here is specifically this yield and allocation discussion.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it, and we can provide some structure to those threads. Let's say either on the forum within the RFC, that on yield, or on Discord, however you like. But we should probably work through that. This is where Notion actually works quite well. I don't know if we have a Ren Notion site we can use, but yeah, we need to kind of work through that, and then we can, kind of put it all different threads, have people make comments on it, and then kind of put it together in one document, have a call on it to make sure we agree, and then I think we're done.
Should we, as a next step, perhaps within the governance section here, in the Discord, separate out these current working threads so that we can treat them as individual topics to be worked through.
It's not a bad idea. Can we, as regular users, spin up a thread? I think we can do that, can't we?
I think so, and we can. I can otherwise enable that.
Okay. Kind of sub-threads to one of these channels.
Yeah.
But I do want to stress, I think that one member of this working group, should be someone with, if not CPA, CPA like or actuary like skills, a real number cruncher, finance whiz kind of person. I wouldn't want to see just, the 5 most willing people, and then there aren't any real experts. We should definitely have one solid expert, even from the get-go, even if we have to, pay them something, just so that we have that anchoring and, someone who's going to, do the put the math together when we look at these decisions.
Do we have anyone with those skills in this group?
It depends what he means as a professional, like finance professional or yield farmer professional, for example. It depends.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we'll have to discuss which we want to prioritize.
You've got to define what professional is, for example. Yeah.
Well, for my company, we have a fractional CFO, right? So not full time, but somebody whose job it is, to look at all areas of our accounting and then, provide executive level analysis on what's going on. Something like that, but with a degen bent, perhaps.
That seems very specific and possibly expensive.
Does everyone strongly feel that? I wanted to ask you if everyone feels very strongly that at this stage we should have something like this.
I don't think we do at this stage. Would be my take.
It's an open question.
I think it's a great suggestion. I think it's something we should keep in mind as we move forward. I think on this, it's a small group with a small chunk trying to get a quick win. And if we're talking about finding a very specific set of skills in a professional and then hiring them on, and then that role might involve like a signature authority on the multi-sig. Like, I don't know if we're ready for that. I do think it's the kind of thing we should be thinking about. Like, I'm really glad you brought that up. Because I think we're at some point, if we don't have the expertise, we might like to borrow some from someone in the future. But at this point, I'm not sure that's as necessary.
That's fair.
I've got recorded as the possible threads we need to follow up on as the reporting that would be involved, the guide rails, and the mandate. Possibly, you brought up compensation. I don't know if we're ready for that at this stage at all. That might open a large can of worms, but maybe we are. And then the makeup of the multi-sig. And then I added one for myself, sort of the communication strategy around this, how we're going to communicate this. I think tying this all back to DeFi's original conversation of moving us from a 1.0 to a 2.0 DAO and making that part of the discussion and letting dark node operators know that this is modeling that behavior and creating a small working group that could go on to form the structure of other working groups might be something worth kind of describing as we try to get a vote and win this initial mandate. Do those seem like is that the right little set of threads we might need to spin up here? Is there anything missing from that?
Sounds more or less accurate. I also made some quick notes in the Treasury chat. You can check them out.
Since we're right at the hour, any next steps? I'd assume continue this discussion in Discord, spin up a couple of threads, roll up our sleeves and start arguing particulars and minutia.
Yeah, I think that while we are all in essence, it seems, aligned on this idea of, let's get the Treasury to some extent into Badger. As DeFi Whiskey has stated from the start, there's going to be a can of worms that opens as a result of that, and here we are. So this is certainly going to take longer than perhaps we thought the quick win would take, but it may be that we can put together some interim working group, with some degree of speed that works for all of us. So I think that dividing the topics and hammering out specifics really ought to be the tack forward.
At this stage, I think we're doing it the right way. I mean, what do you guys think about that?
I think so. I would just one comment. I would sure we inform the wider community about what we're doing now, and I know you did a great job of that with the last call. But if we have these different threads now, some people probably couldn't make this call. It could be a time zone issue or whatever. I don't want people to feel like they weren't invited to join into the actual development of these threads and the strategies that come out of it before we get to the RIP stage. What I want to avoid is, you guys, what's this? We didn't get a chance to provide our input.
It's a tricky question because in the end, all the discussion is out there in the open. It's up to each person individually to come online, check the Treasury chat, and join in, or at least read it. But as an alternative, we can move this discussion to the forum, and that's probably as open as it can possibly be.
I just want to make sure we err on the side of over communicating, just to make sure everyone understands they have the chance to participate, and we actually want them to. I'm sure there's a lot of people who are very knowledgeable. Probably are some CPAs or CFAs out there within our community. Let them participate. I just from just my personal experience, some people can feel like they were left out, even though, of course, they had lots of chances to join. So the more we communicate about what we're doing, the better.
Totally agree.
Well,
we could probably go into the general channel a little more often and just say, hey, still just over here trying to figure some things out. Would love everyone's input. I think somebody mentioned on one of the other ones, Max, it might have been you. Like, hey, we're gonna be doing a little call over here on some of this Treasury stuff. Any of y'all want to jump in? Come on over. I agree with that. We're not. I think we mentioned that in the last call a bit too. This is a public thing for the whole DAO. This is not a small, star chamber or whatever we said.
Gilded star chamber.
If we could do something to reinforce that too. So, like you said, maybe updates over on the forum.
Check the image, guys. Actually, I think Keeper DAO does that pretty elegantly. They just post every active discussion they have going on the forum in the announcements channel. This is a community channel, and we can basically do whatever we want. I mean, in a good way, obviously. So I think it's logical if we've got some kind of discussion going around governance, then we can announce that so more people know about it and have a chance to participate.
Sounds good. I don't know if we need to spin a thread up for each one of those things, but one of the outstanding things I mentioned was the communication strategy, and I think we could fit this element of it into there because we're trying to make sure everyone knows they're available to help, and we actually want everyone's input. Like like you said, there's experts out there that we're not tapping because they might not know about it. But yeah, let's make sure we add that DeFi into this communication strat possible thread spin up, or we take that next.
Just want to throw a quick note on the record that CFOs, CPAs, and all that stuff is probably good, but at this stage, I think what we should be looking for is someone who's very knowledgeable about how different DAOs are structured. This is a new topic for me personally, but I've been doing a lot of reading on how Yearn works, how Badger works, how Maker works and operates. And we should be getting information, I think, on this stuff at this stage because we are trying to set up some kind of structure ourselves, right? And we don't have any. So this is something that we should read up on ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's.
If you come across some quality content on that, can you, especially if you think the rest of us should kind of up level, with it, please pass it along. I mean, the whole DAO idea is new to me as well, and I'd love to avoid some pitfalls down the line. I think a few things like DeFi sharing that DAO 1.0 to 2.0. I mean, that's a simple graphic, but it really illustrates a pretty large concept, and it applies to us. So I mean, if you see something helpful, please pass it along to us, because I'd also like to learn more.
Will do. And also, I want another quick emphasis, quick note that DAOs are new for everyone. There are no experts on DAOs at the moment. It's a new thing, basically. Online DAOs. Yeah, so we are.
You know, Arby, though, that as new as the concept of a DAO is, I think that what we're ultimately going to see, and history will prove this out one way or another, you know, is a reversion to something like a corporate structure. I mean, I know, you know, we want to be all, you know, DeFi cool and not businessy, but you know, there's this sort of way that business operates, you know, where you have some sort of central leadership who's put there by a board of directors, and you've got these, you know, groups below them that perform specific tasks. Yeah, I think we're going to see more structures like that, but being carried out, you know, in a new way, you know, that by way of, you know, this sort of layer of abstraction of being somewhat anonymous and only having your work to show for it, which is a good thing, you know, because favoritism doesn't play into effect. I mean, it's kind of a beautiful thing, but I have a feeling that DAOs are ultimately going to function a lot like businesses.
Then they are not DAOs anymore. I've read Keeper DAO's paper, and they had a really cool example on local communities of fishermen and how they operate, and I think that is something that we can strive to be, even though it might sound not as fancy as a business entity. But I'm trying to find a link so I can share it with you, but it will take some time.
That sounds good. And I'm adding to the list of possible thread spin-ups, DAO conversation, the actual, I guess that's governance, isn't it? Maybe we already have that, but I don't know if there's a thread within that. But I'd love to find a place where these could kind of live and be a little more, I guess, accessible and viewable. Like, this conversation over here is the concept of running a DAO rather than our own governance. I don't know. Maybe that's not as necessary. I could just keep some bookmarks or something. But it seems pretty useful to try and learn a bit more of this. So next steps, spin up some threads. We had a lot of conversation. I tried to document a bit of it. I don't know if it would be a less detailed summary than the last one, but would that be useful?
I think it would, for all that weren't here or aren't gonna
Definitely.
listen through the entire call.
Okay, I'll type that up. It'll be a little bit more of the same thing. We discussed a little of this, a little of that. Here's what we think the next steps are. Some threads we need to spin up, and let's keep on that. You know, hey, if y'all got some Ren friends out there, you know, let them know what we're doing over here. Let them invite them to contribute. Yeah, I definitely agree with the importance of, like you said, DeFi, about trying our best to kind of get the word out here. This is everyone again, but I guess also keeping in mind, like we discussed, there's only a few people willing to put in some work at this stage, but I'm hoping that after we work through some of the administration and minutia and actually put a little bit of flesh on the bones, maybe it'll be easier for some folks with expertise and contributions they could make to say, oh, okay, I'd love to come over there and help out a little bit. So maybe we're doing a little bit of the ugly, I don't know, ditch digging, and then after that we can. That's a terrible analogy, but all right.
By the way, I found the text I had in mind. I'm gonna link it, and you can read it.
Great.
I think it's pretty interesting and neat concept.
Okay, thanks everyone. I think that was a good call. Unless there's something else we need to do, I think we're done.
Yep. Thank you, guys.
That's adjourned. Thanks, guys.
Have a great day. Thanks everyone.
Thank you guys.
Bye.